I'm going to hand it over to Keith Scott at Diversitech.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon all that's online today. I want to spend a little bit of time telling you about what we did uniquely at Diversitech. We had a unique problem, and I would like to discuss that with you, but first we'll talk about our agenda today. So next slide, please. This afternoon I'd like to talk about some of the Diversitech priorities that we needed, the requirement there, the business requirements matrix that we made to address the requirement the business had, our setups, what we actually did in using spreadsheet servers and building our templates and application configurator setup as well. And then we want to discuss the templates we did for the different subsidiary companies that Diversitech now owns, and I've listed 3 of them in here particularly. I mean, since we've done this presentation in the past, we've actually added another company in Australia that's got another unique ERP which we connected to with spreadsheet server as well. And we want to discuss this consolidation process that we built for financial consolidation for month-end closing to speed up all the financial roll-ups from all these multiple ERP data sources. And lastly, try to field any questions that you may have. So with that, next slide, please. Here at a high level is a business requirements matrix that we designed where we looked at multiple products, which may be of interest to you if you're looking at this online, where initially we created the business criteria, which was saying, here's what the business says they really need, and then we flagged the ones as a high priority with a Y so that we would say these are the ones that are most important down to least important. And then we wanted to look at these products, and as you can see, we looked at Insight software, we looked at Spreadsheet Server, we looked at Tableau as well, and then we went down our criteria list to see which ones were the best fit for us and what the overriding priority was for the business. Of course, speed to implementation is always important. Scalability, one of the things that we were looking at is we have a lot of new subsidiaries coming online as Diversitech has grown their business, and so we have to scale quickly and be able to bring other people online into the solution quickly as well. Of course, we looked at costs, we looked at the licensing, we looked at other things. Multiple data sources in one report. Obviously, this one was very key to us because, as you can tell from our list, we have multiple ERPs, and each one of these ERPs are actually connected to a different database source. Like, for instance, Morris is a Sage 100 ERP, which has a ProvideX database. Alltemp, that company, uses Infor Progress. Our company in Australia, Pump House, is actually Microsoft Navision, which is SQL database. The company in Australia, AC Direct, uses a product called MYOBEXO, and that's a very unusual ERP name, I'm sure, and it's a SQL Server based. And lastly, Diversitech, which we're running JD Edwards Enterprise One, and we're running it on SQL Server. So what we did, next slide please, that makes this very unique is we went with the approach to understand what would be the single common thread between all these ERPs that would let us get into their systems through the database, not through the application, to be able to draw out just the data that we needed in real time in order to do our data consolidations, our financial roll-ups, and et cetera, et cetera. So when we went through the analysis, we didn't want to create a data warehouse at the beginning because the data warehouse is static. We run the extracts overnight. We will not have the result until the next day. And then the result is automatically, old and stale. It's not dynamic in real time. So we wanted something that could give it to us in real time. So we took the approach that Spreadsheet Server would give us that data in real time. So now we took steps to learn how to connect to each data source. So what you're looking at on this screen is the ODBC Data Source Administrator and some of the connections that we have built out here where we're using open database connectivity, the common thread, to connect to all these data sources at all these unique locations. And each one of these represents a location at a physical site where we have these companies. Some are actually over in London, some are in Australia, some are up in Canada, some are in the U.S., and some more to be determined, where we're reaching into their databases in real time, and we've configured the ODBC connection to do that for us. So if you look at the second piece of this slide, you'll see the description, a 64-bit server, the host name, which we got off the hosting system, what port we're coming into, and then the validation process that we use, where we're using validation profiles to log in and open that database connection securely, and it allows us to do the extract. So essentially, if you're looking on this screen, you see we've got connections into Salesforce, we've got connections into Sage 100, that's what SODAMAS 90 means, and that's accounting master system for the 90s. That's basically what Sage actually called their driver at that time. And then N4 Progress, that's the one that's highlighted currently, and the one right up above it is the one for the Sage software. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. So building out these tabs and making sure that they work successfully is paramount to being able to connect. So if you're connecting to another ERP source, whether it's a subsidiary you own or whether it's a new client where you're building a shared trusted relationship, you need to set up the communication access, whether that's a VPN tunnel, whether that's adding their server to your domain, and then you need to set up security on both sides to where you can validate the connection and you can actually open up the database and do inquiries. So the advanced tab here, we're setting by default isolation level to say it's a read-only, committed. We timestamp the data. The particular security and encryption between all the different ERPs has to be determined per ERP. Some of them are unique. Some of them will require no encryption. Some of them will require full encryption. Each one's unique to itself, and be happy to follow up with people if they have a unique question about that. But we had to work through that in some trial and error method to make sure that we could join to their database successfully, and we were able to. So next slide, please. So as you see, we're looking at the Progress Open Edge. We're talking about the driver that we used. This basically is a connection that can be either done locally on your laptop if you're using your laptop to connect with Spreadsheet Server, or as we did in our design, we set up a VMware instance and we install Spreadsheet Server on a VMware instance, and we share that connection, and we built one instance of ODBC configuration out there for all the ERPs we're connected to, and then we manage that through a schedule, and we run the extracts that we want on a schedule and deliver those to finance. So lastly on this slide, you see where we're testing the connection, make sure the connection's established, and then we know that we're okay now between the two data sources to be able to run extracts. The next slide, please. This is what the initial setup looks like on the Spreadsheet Server side inside Application Configurator. Once we set up the ODBC connection on a laptop or on a server, then we go into Spreadsheet Server and we build in like kind our DSN, our data source name that we want to use in Spreadsheet Server. And if you notice, we put more detail on it here. It's the data source name. It's an N4 Progress connection name. We're using the data source name that matches our ODBC config you've seen earlier. And then we pick the syntax that we need to use for the translation. And this is very important. The syntax can vary a little bit between different databases, as you'll experience, but most of it's very easily overcome. Syntax between some different versions of SQL. If you've worked with SQL in the past, you understand what I'm referring to. And lastly, the validation profile and the password, which is stored in the data source name that we built on Spreadsheet Server in the configurator. And then lastly, we basically test the connection to make sure that the connection works for Spreadsheet Server to use. Next slide. And in this example, we're showing opening up the Query Designer inside of Spreadsheet Server to show you we're picking and designing a query name. Where at this particular example, we're using J.D. Edwards, and we're using our J.D. Edwards SQL Server database, and we're going to be able to access the tables in J.D. Edwards. So this is just to show you a connection being built and a query being designed inside SQL Server. Next slide, please. And here's the sample data that we ran in Query Designer using Spreadsheet Server across one of our entities. As you can see, the tab says N4 Progress, so this is coming out of the N4 Progress database, which the business subsidiary called Alltemp that Diversitech owns uses N4 Progress to run their business on a day-to-day schedule. So in this example, we're pulling out their data from their GL, from sales, from all the data tables that we want to in real time, and we're able to do those extracts live. And then in the following steps, we'll show you how we use that data to match that up to our business system of record, J.D. Edwards. Next slide, please. Okay, in this example, I'm showing you a high level of the mapping process where we're saying from the Morris General Ledger to Diversitech General Ledger. So essentially what we're doing is we're mapping between the chart of accounts between the two GLs, between the General Ledger and Morris that's running the N4 Progress product to the Diversitech General Ledger, which is running J.D. Edwards, and then we're basically mapping those so that we know which particular account in Morris needs to be mapped to which particular account in Diversitech General Ledger for the roll-up. And this is a mapping exercise that you can do inside the Spreadsheet Server tool as well while you're using Excel. So next slide, please. And finally, we've developed our templates. This is an example of the Morris Products templates. And what we did when we delivered this template can be used every month. We always recommend them creating a different template for each month just to keep things clean and neat. But essentially, they would key in the period, and they would key in the data fields. You see that we've got highlighted what fiscal year and period, prior period, current period they want to look at. And basically, they would run the extract live in real time, and then it would pull down the data, and it would map the data against the two GLs, the two chart of accounts, and then show where things are either in balance or out of balance based on the current activity. And at that point, the Diversitech controller could interact with the controllers at the subsidiaries and say, I took a look at your data, I've got a mismatch in one of the accounts here, the $60 variance, and there is no account 000. You need to go back and put this at a valid account number, and then he could run this again in real time to get his GL clean before he did a month-end post. So next slide. And here you can see the actual extracted data in real time. I marked some of the data out confidentially for the business here, but I wanted you to see mainly to see what the keys were. We showed what the Sage key was. We showed what the full J.D. Edwards lookup is. This is essentially a pivot table in action. And so we've married up the two different GL account numbers between the two ERPs, and then we can show the mappings, and then we can show the J.D. Edwards journal entries. And finally, at this point, once we get this process clean and audited, they can basically post this directly in the journal as a journal entry into J.D. Edwards at month end. So this shaved a significant amount of time off the month end process for the business, around 2 weeks, because all of this was a very extremely manual and time consuming and cumbersome process trying to work between static spreadsheets and information coming between the two ERPs. And as I mentioned earlier, if a variance is in the extract, they would immediately see the variance. They can go back and troubleshoot the variance, reconcile the variance, and then pull the extract again, all in real time without the need for a data warehouse. Next slide, please. And just a brief look at the Morris Products to Diversitech account lookups for consolidations. And for those spreadsheet aficionados, you can pretty much see, you know, the design that we did here, which we think is a pretty simple design, which it also requires knowledge of somebody at the subsidiary, let's say Morris, adds a new account and doesn't let Diversitech know. Well, the next time they pull the extract, they'll see a variance and they'll know a new account needs to be added, so they can get feedback immediately And really our best practice recommendation is for them to pull this weekly and do any maintenance or cleanup on it before they get to month end. So if any of the subsidiaries made significant changes, they can deal with the changes before they get to the month end close process. Next slide, please. So that covers it at a very high level. Obviously, there's a lot more details behind this, but I think for those that are online today, I think they see that the process is simple, it's straightforward. You just need to get the right connectivity, the right ODBC drivers to be installed on your system, and working with Excel and spreadsheet server, you'll get fantastic results. We're very pleased with the results that we get, and we're actively working on another integration that we're going to be doing with a company up in Massachusetts very soon. It's a carve-out, and so we're going to be extracting SAP data shortly with spreadsheet server and basically mapping that in through JD Edwards as well.